my spiel?
Yep.
Sure, not a lot of us here tonight, but thank you all for joining us tonight for the CPDC hearing of Monday, September 11th, 2023. From staff, I am Community Development Director Andrew McNichol, and Senior Planner Mary Benedetto is here with us. From the board in person, we have Tom Armstrong, Mark Wetzel, Heather Klisch, Chair John Weston, and Hillary Mative. And over the remote is Tony Diarezzo. This is set up in a hybrid fashion, so we're going to operate under the board's normal procedure, which is that we will open an application, the applicant will present to the board will provide comment and question amongst themselves to the applicant, and then open up to public comment from there. We ask that if you are in person, you come up and come up to the podium so that everybody can hear you. If you are on remote, please stay muted until acknowledged upon by the chair for the public comment period. You can simply use the raise hand feature found under reactions, or if your camera is on, just give a quick wave and we'll look to point you to the chair. We will have to unmute you just as a heads up, so keep that in mind. Anybody who does have public comment, please start with your name and address for the public record. And I can lastly add that RCTV is broadcasting and recording to local channels. I believe that's it from me.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have what looks to be a short agenda. We'll see how it evolves.
Mm-hmm.
So the first item is a continued public hearing on a preliminary subdivision application for 45 Beacon Street.
Does it matter that we don't see Tony up there?
Oh, I didn't realize I was not sharing. Give me 1 second. Thank you. There we go. Phil, I can share the plan on the screen, but if you maybe want to start by summarizing the changes that you had forwarded to us for the board based on the last discussion.
Yes, the major comment on the previous filing was the cul-de-sac being tangent to the property line on the southern end and not having a curve there. So what I've done is to adjust the actual right-of-way of the cul-de-sac, which is shown in red. Added the curve where the cul-de-sac meets the straight line from Beacon Street, right there, yes. So I think that satisfies what engineering had requested. In the process, I also added the frontage and areas of each of the lots because they had changed with this change in the cul-de-sac. I didn't change the pavement just because it is so steep in the back of the property or at the northern end, that to move the paved portion concentric with the circle would mean just a lot steeper slopes or more walls towards that northerly end. So I've left the paved portion of the cul-de-sac where it is. The cul-de-sac itself is 60 feet in diameter as required, and the paved area is 45 feet in diameter, in radius as required.
I see Tony has his hand up.
Yes. I probably have to ask. Nope.
Is this the correct one? According to the agenda, we're supposed to be working on Grandview Road first and then 45 Beacon.
That is not on my agenda. I can share the agenda.
Oh, no problem. Maybe I have the wrong agenda. I do, because this one is dated 8/14.
Thank you for clarifying.
Never mind. Thank you.
So on that point about the layout of the actual paved circle, I thought that we had a point of discussion during last meeting was that the actual built cul-de-sac had to be concentric with the right-of-way. I'm not sure what the purpose of that is, but and so if that is in fact in the regulations, then we probably, if we're going to entertain this, we probably need to have a waiver requesting that it's not.
Yeah, we had gone through some of that language, and the center line really referred to utilities in most aspects, which based on the plan, it looked like the applicant was looking to get the water line and utilities down the center of their proposed paved and constructed surfaces. So we actually didn't notice a very specific waiver in terms of centering the cul-de-sac within the bulb. Ideally, that's the ideal, right? But we discussed and are willing to kind of work with the applicant to make sure that the build versus the layout on paper is both feasible, are both.
All right. Does anyone, before we move forward, does anyone on the board have any issues with that?
With the cul-de-sac or the general?
No, the general idea that the bulb, that the constructed.
I don't see a problem with that, but I see on the entrance road coming in, the paved road is right up against the property line where it reaches, where it comes out onto Beacon Street. And I know there's an existing
I'm looking at
road there,
cheating.
but one of the problems with that is that you've got snow plowing and things like that, that's gonna be pushing stuff from that paved roadway onto someone else's property. So that's why I have a concern with the road not being centered in the right of way, or at least having somewhat of a shoulder within the right of way. You see where I mean that?
Yeah.
And then there's also some other issues, not necessarily related to the layout of the road, but you've got these retaining walls that are right up against the property line that you're not gonna be able to construct those without damaging or entering someone's private property. So I don't know if those are details that get dealt with during the final subdivision design, but you can't have a retaining wall right up against your property line without having some sort of a construction easement with the abutter.
Agreed on the retaining wall front. It is something we would capture in a future definitive application because that's what would go towards construction. But yes, agreed, if that retaining wall is to be built where it's shown, I'm positive easements or other would be needed in order to properly construct it.
Yeah, what we had done was to continue the pavement along the existing edge, but we could certainly during definitive center the extension of Beacon Street in the center of the road and avoid that problem on the left-hand side that you referred to.
And is it the intent that as you enter onto Beacon Street, that there would be a stop sign there?
It was, no, it certainly could be added.
Well,
But
the
it's
reason I'm
not the
bringing,
intent,
the reason I'm bringing that up is because it's coming out at a 10% slope. And so you don't really have a very, and I forget the numbers in the town regulations, but when you come into an abutting street, you can't come in at a 10% slope. It has to be, I want to say it might be 3%. You have to have a certain amount of flat area if you're going to have a stop sign.
It's a good point to add. We can certainly add a stop sign. Can't do much about that grading, I don't think, considering the neighbor right nearby.
Well, I think that, I think the issue here is that there is likely a need to do some further refinements of the plan. You know, yeah, you can't have a stop sign on it, you can't have that stop line at it on a 10% grade. You also, right, you need something. So, right, there's still gonna be a little bit of push and pull.
Yeah, so
On
it says
that,
a
so.
2% from the intersection. You know,
Negative grade intersecting with existing.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
pretty important catch right there.
Which may, in essence, require a little bit more work on the intersection.
You are going downhill at that intersection. So when you leave the cul-de-sac, you're going uphill towards that intersection as opposed to downhill.
right.
So you don't have the
So you have
problem
to
of
start your
stopping
car,
at-
so you have to start your car on a 10% grade if you have a stop sign. So,
Excuse me?
so if you are coming out of the cul-de-sac up onto Beacon Street, when you get to the end of the proposed road, your car is gonna be trying to roll backwards.
Yes.
And even if there's no stop sign, if you're just trying to make the turn and you have to stop because there's another car there, I mean, I guess,
Yeah.
the point that's being made is kind of like whether or not there's a stop sign there, the grade has to be different at the intersection, the grade has to be much
That
gentler.
64 feet is almost the length of the.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think you could consider a waiver on the length of that, but I don't think you can have it come right out onto the existing pavement at a 10% grade.
which means that a portion of the road under this configuration would need to be more than 10% to get up to the right elevation.
Yeah, or you extend the regrading into the intersection,
Yeah,
which is probably more likely to be required. Because there's no way to run it off. We already established that. But I guess, I assume, Andrew, right, I mean, we're talking inches here.
Yeah.
That these are all definitive subdivision issues, because I'm sure that can be made, something can be made to work here.
Yeah, and, you know, because some of the other issues, you know, for instance, we see a proposed drainage on there, but you're on a pretty tight lot, and you know, we haven't seen any drainage calculations, so I know in your decision, it says that isn't, the drainage system isn't approved, but we're not gonna be able to have an overflow going on to a budding property. So that whole thing needs to be reworked to a certain point, as well as the grading in the back of the lots.
Usually in a preliminary plan, the drainage isn't addressed any more than what we've done.
Right, no,
It does have to be done in the definitive, definitely.
I understand that, I just, you know, it's just that, I just wanted to make you aware that there are some, with the proposed layout here, there's some constructability issues.
Understood.
Following up on that, the large rectangular area, that's a galley, I take it? Underground galley? For
Yes.
drainage? Do you have a backup? Expansion area if that fails?
No, we hadn't proposed one, no.
Other changes since we last met, I mean, I know that was, I'm gonna say that was sort of the big one. I don't know if there were others that we need to talk through.
No, I think there is question on that 5% slope within the cul-de-sac, and we did talk with engineering. They didn't see any immediate high-level concerns on that waiver. You know, similarly in a definitive with a bit more information on the grades and a drainage report, but from a current standpoint, they didn't see any concerns with it.
So approving it here doesn't prevent us from requiring
No,
gentler grade later on when we learn more about the drainage and the stormwater plan.
right.
I would just add, from my perspective, I think the drainage going off the site is the biggest issue that they couldn't confront.
And may I ask a question? This may have been asked last time. I can't remember what the answer was. There are a lot of big retaining walls holding up like big roads here. I mean, even though they're minor roads. Who ultimately becomes responsible then for maintaining those retaining walls? Is that a small homeowners association?
Correct.
That depends on if it's public or private, once it's accepted. If it's not accepted by the town, it's the homeowner. Accepted by the town, then it's the town's responsibility.
So is the proposal for it ultimately to be accepted by the town?
No, this is an extension off a private road, and my understanding is that this too is proposed to remain private.
Yeah, that's been my understanding too, thanks.
What would then be the intent? Would it be the 3 homeowners would form the association, or the 2?
It would be 3.
Okay.
It's a lot, that's
That's a
why,
lot,
that's why I
yeah.
flag it.
Thinking of my one that I need to maintain at home, that's a lot. It's a burden.
Or the alternative, it should be built well, so there's no problem.
So not seeing any other items of discussion, at this point? No? Do we want to go through the,
You have to open it.
Tony has his hand raised.
because I'm.
That may bring up some issues too.
Yeah. All right, last week I had brought up the question that, some abutters had said that there was a restriction on this property. I want to say that afterwards, they may have given you, Andrew, a copy of, a variance decision. Is that correct?
Correct. Thank you for that reminder. So we had reviewed previously and again, I believe it was a 1995 decision for a variance on the 45 Beacon Street property. That property was granted a variance by the Zoning Board of Appeals to develop a single-family lot that did not meet the current frontage requirements. It did come with a condition that that dwelling be the only one to remain on the lot. Based on our understandings and review, it does not restrict a subdivision of the lot, because now if the applicant is proposing to build the adequate frontage, the variance is no longer required, thus the conditions don't necessarily apply in this case, or those specific of conditions. So it didn't come with the restriction to not subdivide, and that allows them to move forward with such under our current understanding.
I know,
Yes, from what, oh, after you, please.
I know we talked about the right of way. Were there any restrictions on that?
There were not found.
Yes, what
Oh.
I had read in the restrictions was that the dwelling could not be turned into, or additional dwelling units could not be added to that house unless all the permits were requested and received properly. So I assume with the subdivision, that would also apply, that They're requesting, submitting their applications, requesting a proper approval for the proper permits. But in looking at that, I did see that there is a deed restriction for a fence not being higher than 4 feet at a corner of the original 2B lot. I would hope that in whatever the next plan is, that restriction is pointed out on the plan, so we can ensure that we're not building anything where we're not supposed to be.
Yes, we can do that. 4-foot fence, yeah, at the corner. Sorry, Mark, were you actually asking about this right of way in the corner here?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Actually, I would like to condition and have put a draft condition in for further documentation for that right of way to be submitted by the applicant, because I do just want to be sure. From my review, I haven't found anything, and that right of way is at this point in this lot entirely within that 45 Beacon lot, but I want to make sure that we're not restricting access, which is granted from Main Street to the 590 Main Street and 17 Bethesda. With or without this wall, you could access them from Main Street, but I do just want to make sure that there's conditions, there's not a condition of no structure here if this is a over 4-foot wall or other. So I do just want to do some additional due diligence before a definitive application on that right of way. To, yes, make sure we're not allowing something we shouldn't be.
Others before we dig into the, what is that?
Decision.
Draft
Decision? Is it a decision?
It is a decision.
All right.
Just one more question. With regard to the drainage that potentially could run off the site, granted, we know it's going to be a plan that would be submitted after that. Are we saying, because there's a lot of impervious property here, and you've got the entire length of the driveway, are we going to ask for information on a 10, 25, 50, 100-year event, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They'll do a full drainage
Full-
report.
Okay.
Yep, and it's going to require a stormwater permit application with this application as well. Don't have any hands raised, so. Bring up the draft decision if you guys are ready. So, in typical fashion, we've summarized kind of the actual vote here of what could come, which is a preliminary subdivision application, which again is not a buildable plan, but provides some guidance to the applicant for a future definitive on what may be appropriate. So we listed the material submitted to date, including all public comment and revised plan sheets, as well as this draft decision. Under findings, we've noted the existing conditions both of the right-of-way and the parcel itself, and the current proposal, which is to improve the right-of-way to allow for a 3-lot subdivision, a net of 2 lots, and the maintaining of the existing single-family home on lot 3. The site is within the S15 zoning district, and the proposed lots will comply with the bulk frontage and area requirements. And based on the drawings, all of the dwellings look to meet the required setback and additional dimensional controls of that zoning district.
Andrew,
Yep.
is this an area somewhere in this flow to note that there had been a previous condition, but a finding is that it doesn't apply because the subdivision would then create the frontage? I'm just thinking for the paper trail and
Yeah.
posterity to refer back to what you just told us about the previous CBA decision.
Yeah, I can
And
definitely.
that the finding is that again, that portion of it is kind of rendered moot by creating the adequate frontage. Is that appropriate?
I just question how that may be worded.
Okay, I'm just thinking
Um,
about, ultimately questions that come up in a neighborhood, yeah.
I mean, just from my perspective, I'm retired, but I've practiced law for a long time, out
Yeah.
of state, I will add. And I just don't like the commission getting involved in making legal decisions per se, when they can be resolved by other means. I think it can be handled, I think it can be handled in some wording.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Saying-
because
saying
it
it's
is
been-
our
it's been-
finding
it's
that
been-
we're
it's been
we're
raised.
not concerned with that. So
Yeah.
we are reaching that finding, whether that's a legally binding or legally appropriate thing to do. I don't know, but that is part of what we're basing our decision off of.
So maybe our wording is not that it's rendered moot, but that we are aware of that previous restriction. And this proposed preliminary plan provides the required frontage that previous restriction was intended to address. I guess is a better way, just that we found that it would now have the required frontage.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly how you
I
wanna
think
word
that
it.
finding,
Yeah.
I think that finding is not a problem.
Thank you,
The-
okay.
the- You know, the frontage is no longer an issue.
Yeah.
Right. But there's other recourse if other people want to pursue it.
Yeah, we
And the
should just
commission-
say that a decision by the zoning board of appeals no longer applies, but that the frontage is then adequate.
You shouldn't put the decision on Zoom.
I shouldn't.
No, it's not. I don't see it.
No. Sorry, everybody on Zoom. Also getting. Sorry, it was on my screen. Good. See buttons that don't work. I can work on this a bit tomorrow, but is there any glaring absences?
I like that you're, right, I think to Tom's point, you're not I think we can't comment on whether that previous variance is valid or not, just that the conditions aren't part of
Tied
this.
to
Tied
this
to this.
application.
And
Yeah.
that very good point that the condition doesn't restrict the subdivision.
Okay. I can spice that up a little bit though.
Okay.
Thank you. Good comment and good capture. So, going to pick back up on what is now number 5, proof of concept. So, the concept plan was revised to depict that 60-foot radius bulb with the S-curves, backward S-curves along the throat. It's important to note here that the proof of concept plan does not require a 60-foot throat because it's an existing right-of-way that is being improved at 40 feet wide. So it's a bit conflicting with the waiver below, but virtually by right, the applicant only can build upon that 40-foot existing right-of-way. So they did not need to prove that to 60 feet wide, just the bulb at 60 feet. So the proposed right-of-way mimics that, so it will mimic the 40-foot right-of-way throat with 24 feet of such being paved into what is on paper a 60-foot cul-de-sac bulb, but only 45 feet of which is to be paved. Waiver requests have been submitted for sidewalks within that right-of-way. No sidewalks exist along Beacon Street, and we can discuss, the board can discuss as you get to waivers the type of curbing desired and appropriate here for this type of application. We noted that a traffic study is not required under the preliminary subdivision plan requirements. It is required under a definitive subdivision application. However, we did want to note the applicant at that time of submittal may request a waiver should they find reasoning to provide for such. Trees, landscaping, and screening. So we noted the many retaining walls. Again, preliminary plans lack a lot of detail in terms of landscape. They don't require a landscaping plan. A definitive application does, so we would likely see a bit more information in any future application. Similar comment for lighting as well. Utilities, we know that water and sewer are proposed to be extended and connected, as well as electric, telephone, and cable, all of which will be underground serviced. So that will go through the right-of-way extension. Drainage details, they had some concepts on the plan, but we don't want to approve anything herein because there is a lack of detail again in a preliminary application. We would expect that any future definitive application is capturing the right-of-way stormwater within the right-of-way itself at the low points, and an infiltration basin is expected based on the concepts submitted. As previously mentioned, a stormwater permit application is going to be required with a definitive application because this disturbs more than 1 acre of total land. And the easements that one would be required for the utilities, as well as we want to make sure that any abutting structures and fencing on the plan, it looks like there's some fencing that spans additional lots. So we just want some clarification on that, and if so, easements will likely need to be granted for the existing homeowners who maintain that fence to be able to keep that, and all future owners of any future lots would need to be made aware of that. So we would capture that all, get drafts, and move forward with those if appropriate. And typical per subdivision state law, the applicant shall consider orienting the homes for the benefit of rooftop solar in the future. Any questions on the findings to date? And I can also look at the Zoom.
There's nothing.
So when discussing waivers, as noted, we do, despite the right-of-way throat being allowed to develop at 40 feet because it's pre-existing, we do still request a waiver from such for tracking and housekeeping. Looking back at previous subdivisions who had improved existing right-of-ways, we kept this waiver in there. So I know it feels conflicting, but I wanted to match what we did in the past. So in short, waiver 1 is a waiver request to reduce the right-of-way width from 60 feet to 40 feet. The second waiver request is to build out the proposed 24-foot pavement width where 30 feet is required, as well as the additional request for no sidewalk and currently what is proposed as concrete curbing. The third waiver is a waiver exceeding the maximum slope of the cul-de-sac being 3%. We had noted that on the plan left portion of the cul-de-sac that it was a grade of 5%. And we haven't seen any specific reasoning that we should be overly concerned with that waiver request, but I do think we would note that more info would certainly help support it. Waiver request requiring a landscape island within the cul-de-sac, pretty typical on current applications, plowing concerns, maintenance concerns. The applicant has also provided a waiver request from requiring vertical granite curbing to be installed due to the limited scope of the project they feel they have proposed. I think that might warrant some discussion on CPDC and from CPDC on town standards and what we typically look for in new development. And in a similar, a waiver from 7.2 requiring sidewalks along both sides of the right of way, and they're requesting that they be eligible to provide no sidewalks. Any comments?
So, a couple things.
Mhm.
One is, before we dig into discussion on the waivers, I do want to make sure that it gets opened up now that we sort of have everything laid out here. But I do want to get clarification on the waivers themselves. Sort of as you're describing them, right, is that a lot of these require a little bit more, to have a little bit more information before, right, we know enough to be able to say whether that's appropriate or not. But the way that it's worded in this decision, it's worded as if we are giving the waiver based on the information that's been submitted to date. So a little clarification on if you grant a waiver at the preliminary stage, what's that mean?
So waivers on a preliminary are non-binding, and I can certainly add language here that is the case, which is a good note. And I would ask in a preliminary case that we vote one by one so that any additional comments are captured in a motion language that any approval or denial is based on the requirement that a future application provide additional information and context. If that helps.
That makes sense to me, at least. So with that, I don't know if there's anyone in the audience here or at home that have questions or comments on the preliminary subdivision at this point.
I have an issue about waiver number 2. I'll let Andrew finish typing.
Mary, is there anyone else?
Okay.
Okay.
We're good.
Waiver number 2, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, you say a waiver from section 7.1.3. Shouldn't that be specific to 7.1.3.a requiring 30-foot cross section? Everything else should be required that they do submit in a matching the requirements of the cross section. It just sounds like the waiver is saying 7.1.3, which has 6 sections. You're giving a waiver for all of them.
Yeah, we go back and forth on this because you are right. We make this typically specific to the pavement width, but figure 1 itself, which is referenced in 713, is your typical 60-foot 2-sidewalk tree lawn figure. So we try to capture the subsequent waivers in here. But I know we've done this in the past, so I can pull from an existing decision the language from such. Sorry, which letter did you mention specifically? Yeah. 30
Yeah,
foot
A is
travel.
the 30-foot travel way.
Yeah. I am happy to defer to the board on this one, not to put it to you guys, but if you would prefer that it's limited to A alone, that's fine. If you really want to capture the entirety of the figure which is mentioned in B, I can do that. Cause like at the end, they are differing from figure 1.
But
In their
the piece that
proposal.
we're saying is waived is about the 30-foot width. Oh, and the request for no sidewalk and no
But I
concrete.
think there's other waivers for those.
There are other waivers that capture those.
So I would agree with Tony that it should be
Be A.
for A. I think if you,
And then delete the part about the request for no sidewalk and concrete curbing, because that's taken care of in the other requests.
wouldn't be concrete curbing anyway.
Right.
I don't know where this leads to, but I'd have problems with 5, which calls for substitution of bituminous concrete curbs as opposed to granite, at least on the downside of the circle, because if a plow rips up part of it and we start to deteriorate that wall.
And then we have a storm. Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
Don't, when you say if a plow, it's when a plow.
Okay. No, we have better drivers than that, don't we?
They just put.
No,
big conch
it's a private road.
on- Right, no,
They hire their own.
but it does impact
Yeah.
the drainage systems.
Just for the record, the town does plow private ways as a
Oh.
emergency requirement.
Oh, okay.
Other discussions on the waivers as they're written. And I guess I do want to come back to that on, right, how we address that. I think it's somewhat consensus on the board that certainly not approving complete replacement of vertical granite curb. So I don't know how we articulate that.
I would say all vertical granite curb.
Yeah, and then, right, so if the definitive subdivision plan comes back, the proponent can still ask for a waiver if they wanna do it partially, right? If they wanna replace,
They could.
so do we just not approve that waiver?
I guess that's the, right, that's that's, at this point, that's the option, right? Either we approve the waiver or we don't, there's still, right, none of it's binding.
Right, cause they
Yeah.
can still
All right.
request a waiver for a portion of it if that's.
Or you could simply just say, more information is needed to evaluate this request for waiver.
I'd just say, don't approve.
I would,
Don't grant the waiver.
I think direct guidance to the applicant is the best path forward to the most complete definitive application you would get. So if vertical granite is desired, I would, find that in the motion, whether that's denial or not, but likely.
Discussions on other waivers?
Even though I'm a big
Requests.
fan of sidewalks in this case, since I'm okay
Yeah,
with that.
there's not a good reason for sidewalks out there. It's a 10% grade. It's not like the wheelchairs are gonna be going up and down. But that brings up a different point that I wanted to talk about sometime at the meeting, not necessarily related to this, is when we grant things like no sidewalks, it's obviously at the benefit of the developer who's not gonna have to put it in, whereas developer on the other side of town does have to put it in, so he's saving money. Should at some point have some sort of mechanism where we capture the value of that and use it at offsite improvements.
I would love to explore that discussion further with you.
Yeah,
So I was under the impression that we can't do that in Massachusetts, but maybe we can.
That's what we need to figure out.
Don't know the answer personally.
If we're in Virginia, we could do that till the Cows come home. So, I think moving on in this decision, do we want to go through the conditions? And then we'll come back.
Sure.
And,
Okay.
vote on the waivers.
So under conditions, most of these apply under general, because again, these plans in this decision is not buildable. So we noted that under subdivision control law, it's a language within the state law that, within 7 months of the preliminary application being filed, that a definitive would come. We've kind of already hit that point, right? The application was filed, I want to say February or March, so it's unlikely that the definitive would tie back to that exact application date. I haven't been able to find where that 7 months comes from and what it means on a non-binding decision like this, because it never precludes anybody from submitting a definitive application at a future date. So we just wanted to note that here, that while we are keeping the 7-month condition, we're already beyond that, so it's a bit odd. But the definitive can come at any time, and in all likelihood, as long as it's within a relevant time frame, we can refer back to this decision in the minutes and discussions that ensued here to help inform hopefully future conversations.
Is there, and I'm gonna ask a question I don't know if you should answer or not, but I'm gonna put it out there anyways, right? Like typically, right, there's a 2-year, right? There's a 2-year rule for most permits in Massachusetts. Would this fall, does this fall under that same 2-year, I mean, not this, right, definitely not this clause right here, but for a preliminary subdivision, does that fall under that same 2-year rule, or you don't know, because?
To my knowledge, it doesn't. I believe that's based off the that's based on the endorsement plan date or the or surety agreement date, whichever is earlier, and we have neither right now, so it'll be based off one of those 2 dates, and it's 2 years from that date.
So,
all of which
and
follows.
Right, this is not in reference to this application at all, but 6 months late, 6 years later, something, right, for whatever reason, this doesn't move forward, 6 years later, someone, whether this owner or some other owner, could pick that preliminary subdivision decision up and try and go forward with it, but my guess is that there would be maybe enough issues that you really.
Yeah, I would say depending on regulation changes and current standards and needs, the conversation would change.
Just sort of thinking through what it all means.
Nope, good question.
Well, Andrew, that raises the question. If the regulations do change and we ever have this approval, would it apply to the current regulations or the new regulations in the future for the definitive subdivision?
So that's a good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. It's unlike a zoning bylaw amendment, which it goes back. So I don't have a clear answer for you. I can get one, but very good question, because I don't know.
I don't think we need it tonight, but knowing it in the future would help. Thank you.
Yep, I agree. I just kept sharing that. Okay. Good comment, thank you. So we had noted a few plan revisions that we would most certainly like to see that are outside of what's required in a definitive subdivision list. We'd love to see the existing ways that are shown on the plan that join into the property. We'd love to see whether they're public or private shown on the plan and their existing pavement width. We'd like to see citation by name and case number of existing special permits and or variances that have been granted to this property. That's typical of a planned development, so we would expect to see that on a definitive application, similar to the deed and plan references used to formulate these. So we would most certainly expect that on a definitive. Outside of that, what we had highlighted, vertical granite curbing, and I guess this condition will apply based on any future waiver vote of number 5 above, so we'll come back to that if needed. We also noted that based on tonight's conversation, that the applicant shall ensure that the intersection at Beacon Street, where the improvements are proposed at that L, meets the requirements of section 711 that you had discussed earlier, the 10% slope going in. I can add language that they could request a waiver from that, but I'd like to keep it to try to look to comply, and we'll have the discussion from there. Similar on drainage design, we want to make sure, based on your comments and where we've seen the plan look at currently, that any designed overflow is not directing onto a budding property, because that wouldn't be appropriate anyways. I think we would capture that anyways, but I wanted to put it in writing. Similarly, we had discussed tonight the private way that a portion of which is entirely within the lot. I would just like to see some documentation demonstrating the rights to that private way, making sure that any direct abutters to that right of way don't also hold interested rights in it, so that we're not allowing something we shouldn't in a future definitive application. We noted that no driveways are approved herein. They're subject to engineering review and approval, and as necessary, the select board if needed. Same on drainage design. We would expect that we get a full drainage plan, drainage report, and a stormwater permit application that is all to be reviewed by planning, engineering, and others as necessary. Utilities, along with DPW and RMLD, would need to comply with all separation and additional requirements and permits. The health division will get a copy of the definitive application as required under state law. And I would expect in this case where there's no septic, there's not many, if any, comments at all, but we will look to gain such anyways. Snow storage, I think we'd like to see, based on the comments provided in this limited area, how snow is to be stored based on the grades and tight area. Electric utility, I think we had already previously mentioned, but RMLD has to approve any of the electrical infrastructure and its location, including transformers, any light poles, and the underground utility. And property maintenance, in the meantime, the property has to be maintained in a neat and orderly fashion while any future applications and development is pending. That, I hope, captures everything, but.
Any further discussion either from the board or from the public?
Not seeing any hands on the Zoom.
Right. So I think, right, we'll close the public hearing and then go and vote on the waivers and then on the decision itself.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Do we need to do?
You do need to do roll call.
Okay. All right.
And Tom will not be voting because you have all 5 of your normal members, any of which who had missed a hearing have submitted the required Mullen Rule form that has been posted with the clerk. So all 5, call them normal members for lack of a better term, are eligible and will vote here.
All right. So we'll start with I'm sorry. So Tony,
Aye, close the hearing.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes.
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 Heather, yeah. Thank you. Yep. 5.
Perfect. I'm sure 6 waivers, that will be a tedious one, but
All right. So first waiver, a waiver from section 7.1.1A requiring right of way width to 60 feet. So you're saying we want a motion with any
any
clarifying.
clarifying
Right.
request or comments that would be needed, if any, to support.
Did we need any clarification on this one?
I don't think so, but unless I missed
Why don't,
something.
I'll make a motion to approve a waiver from section 1.1.1A requiring the right of way width of 60 feet. And then if anybody wants to condition it,
All
we
right.
can do that.
I'll second.
All right. Tony?
Aye.
Hillary?
Yes.
John, yes. Heather?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
You want to just keep going? with
Yeah, I'll
motions?
just keep going.
Yeah.
Could you make that just like a little
I
bit
sure
bigger?
can.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move to grant a waiver from section 7.1.3A that a 30-foot paved travelway be provided.
And to clarify, and I can add something here, or it's below, the applicant is requesting a 24-foot paved travelway where 30 feet is required.
Okay, so can we just, yeah, you've written that right there, okay,
Yeah, I can reword this to better
okay.
match what I just said.
I'll second that.
All right. Tony?
No.
Hillary? John? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Mark, yes.
Not on my game today.
It's 4
Right.
If I can with the board, I'm gonna add language if you agree that we determine and find the existing paved width of Beacon Street to ensure it is 24 feet to match. If that's okay. I believe it's 24, but I don't recall that being
I'd
shown.
be surprised if it's 24.
Yeah,
It's 24-ish.
Yeah.
So do you say,
Varies.
so do we say something like, is it like pending confirmation that Beacon Street is approximately 24 feet long?
Well, I think the 24-foot pavement width is,
it is.
even if it's 21 for the existing, I think.
We still need 24, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me nix what I just said. Sorry for confusion.
All right. Waiver number 3.
So I move to grant a waiver from section 7.1.5B requiring the maximum slope of the cul-de-sac to be 3%.
The applicant is requesting a rate of 5% where that 3 is
Yep,
required.
and you have that there. Do we also want to say that? Sorry, that's my motion. I know this isn't very clean here. But this is one where we did want to say, do we want to just note somewhere that, and maybe it's the beginning, maybe it's the end, that any of these may change in the definitive subdivision based on additional information about drainage, et cetera. That's what we wanted to do, right? Oh, you did that already
I
upstairs,
did
okay.
do
I
that,
mean, up above,
Yeah.
upstairs.
but I can add.
I think we're all in that funk tonight.
Okay, So,
And I'll second that, but I have a question for discussion. Has town engineering, did they have any issues with the 5% or did
They
they?
didn't have any immediate concerns on it.
with the same information that we had now,
So,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so we moved in second.
All right, we moved and seconded. Tony,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes, Heather,
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
All right, number 4.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I moved to grant a waiver from section 7.1.5E requiring a landscaped island within the cul-de-sac.
Second.
Any other discussion?
Just for a point of understanding, do we ever require
No.
and
No.
why is that one of the?
So, right,
So
this,
just never have to have a
right,
good
this was
bylaws.
in, right, this has been in the subdivision requirement for a very long time. If we ever get to a point where we go and modify them, then I am 99.9% certain that it'll come
You
out.
go out and try to plow that cul-de-sac.
Right,
with an island
right,
in the
that's
middle.
why, right, it was someone's good idea at one point, and,
And they actually, I've seen it in bigger cul-de-sacs.
where it's more like
Where it's
almost
like a rain garden.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But like they're all getting paved over or somebody drives across it and it's
Yeah,
a big problem.
yeah, so, yeah, the answer is
It lasts a week.
every subdivision.
Yeah.
Like this is just like a default.
Pulled over from
Yes.
a long time ago.
Trying to get more green
Yeah,
in there.
and we really just haven't had a chance, redoing the subdivision rules has not been ever risen to the moving to our agenda. So we have a motion, we have a second. All right, to vote on that motion for this waiver, Tony?
Yes.
Yes.
Hillary, yes. John, yes.
Heather, yes?
Yes.
Mark, yes. All
Okay,
right.
now what do I
Number
do
5.
with this?
Everything has to be in the affirmative, so we're voting,
Okay,
Yeah.
so I move to grant a waiver from section 7.1.7 requiring vertical granite curbing to be installed.
I'll second that.
Okay.
All right, Tony,
No.
Hillary,
No.
John, no,
Heather, no.
Mark,
No.
and number 6.
Okay, I move to grant a waiver from section 7.2 requiring sidewalks along both sides of the roadway.
Second.
Other discussion? All right, Tony,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes, Heather,
Yes.
Yes.
Mark, yes.
Those all 5, yes?
Yep.
Yes.
6.
All right, the decision itself,
Please.
Okay, I'll move to approve the preliminary subdivision plan decision for 45 Beacon Street at the proposed street name TBD,
as amended.
as amended.
I'll second.
All right, any last discussion on this? No? All right, Tony,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes, Heather,
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Great. That is it for this one. So, thank you, board. Thank you, Phil and Angelo, if you're here. We'll look to get you a posted copy of this as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, the second item on our agenda is a public hearing for site plan application and special permit for 415 Main Street, McDonald's USA. and at the request of the applicant, the application is continued or they requested to continue, or was it not noted? I mean, where
No,
were we?
so the applicant submitted, we had noticed the opening for tonight based on our comments and other staff comments. They asked to continue the opening of the public hearing. I think that'll be important in the motion, just on our end to capture what is actually being continued. To the October 16th meeting date so they can adequately respond to the comments provided.
So we are postponing this agenda item,
Correct.
right, until Monday, October 16th.
Correct.
And with that, I think we don't take a vote on that because we're not even
It's not even a
It's
hearing.
not even a hearing, it's nothing. It's just notice here that we're not taking it up. All right.
One question for Andrew. Does this impact our timeline for the final approval?
In
McDonald's?
For
I do not believe so. I can double check the statute, but I do believe because there's a special permit for signage in here that it's tied to the opening of the hearing. And I can double check that, but regardless, the applicant requested and agreed to this continuance, thus extending all of our timelines with them.
So we,
It's not even really a continuance. it's a-
Yeah,
it's a
Yeah, I keep
postponing
saying
of-
continuance,
of the
but
hearing.
yeah,
we haven't received anything from them, correct?
I have
We
received.
haven't.
We have.
Right,
We
we
haven't.
haven't, no, we have. And we did post everything online because there has been interested parties in this discussion from the public, so we did post what was presented, just note that it's very much subject to change based on the staff comments, so that's why we didn't wanna provide anything yet, but per public request, we just wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to know something was coming, so.
A lot of the plans were also already posted when they went through ZBA. So they went through ZBA earlier this year and there was a set of plans posted then, they applied to us. We posted the kind of like preliminary set they've given us. And then we'll send you guys the final when we get those in the next month.
So the thing to check on is whether or not the time frame starts when you receive it or we receive it.
I think it starts when you open the public.
I think it's when you
Yeah,
open.
based on when we open the
yeah.
public hearing.
It might not hurt just to get them to affirm that they're requesting a continuance to a date specific.
Yep.
Just resolve all ambiguity.
Yeah, they've agreed to that October 16th date, but I can confirm tomorrow all of the semantics within the.
Well, that's probably, October 16th is probably within the time period, it's just that when does the time period end if
For
there's
it
no decision in
to act,
October?
right, yeah, right. Noted,
I assume all the abutters have been notified,
correct,
but they will not get a new notification for the continuation.
correct, that's an important note, thank you, so a new notice will not be delivered,
Well, wait a second.
Wouldn't it be?
No,
though?
because we
like,
haven't
yeah.
done anything here, right? We have not done a thing, we haven't opened a hearing, you guys, this is gonna come on negative, but
no,
it's not at all,
you're
right,
good.
you noticed
For
something
this
that,
date.
that for this date that did not start, and so when that happens, right, like,
We can do it as stuff, we can do it manually.
I think you need to
I think
renotice
you need
it
to
because the
renotice it.
notice is for the opening of a hearing. The
yeah, and
opening
if
of
we're
the
not opening a
didn't
hearing, then I
happen.
think you need to renotice it.
I can do it,
Did-
no problem,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
you got it.
Do you think there's gonna be changes to significant changes to the plan? 'Cause
Yes.
I'm gonna be out of town then. 2
Um,
weeks before, and I may not even be at that meeting.
Mary said that.
I'll defer to Mary, yeah.
There will be,
There will be,
yes,
okay.
yes. Not to all aspects of it, but to enough aspects of it, that's why they delayed.
Okay.
The amount of comments we provided them with would require them changing a number of their plans, so.
I take it you wanted to review in advance.
Well, I don't even know if I'm flying back that day, I don't even know what time I'm leaving, so.
Well, I was just gonna say that
That's
you
what I would say is
could
like-
require their comments in by a date which would allow you to review.
Oh, so we
for whatever
definitely-
reason.
So without, yeah, we've asked for the plans submitted by a certain date for staff review. I'm happy to forward them as soon as we get them, but just
You're what, the first 2 weeks of October you're traveling? Okay. They'll be here for there'll be multiple hearings.
Yeah, well, I just wanna I haven't looked at anything, so I'll get up to speed with what's online and just kind of see what they're doing. Are they doing a double drive-through?
I don't wanna discuss the application without it opening.
You can read the ZBA hearing if you want.
All right. Next item, planning updates and other topics.
Yes, so
Star of the MBTA communities update, is that where we want to start?
that is where we will start and potentially end. So I'll pass it to Mary to start because we closed our survey and she drafted up a report, which I can share on screen.
I don't need to go through the report in a lot of detail. I provided to all of you. Basically, we just wanted to ask if you guys had questions about anything that was in the report. We'll be covering the survey results in kind of the last portion of our meeting next Tuesday. I'm happy to discuss it as much or as little as you want tonight. If you've all read it, I don't want to spend a lot of time.
Tuesday?
Next Tuesday, we are having our first kind of kickoff public meeting for our MBTA communities process. So it's gonna be, we're planning on like an hour of presentation, hour-ish of presentation. It's gonna be thrilling. It is actually, it's gonna be pretty good. We did a test run. We did a test run of it, of a lot of the content at the senior center presentation, and it was very well received.
And
So
it's only in person, is that correct?
it is also on Zoom. We're running it as a webinar.
So I love this. I mean, great stuff here, really interesting results, I thought. I mean, really something to think about. My question for you is on the images from question one, are those images as we see them there, is that the size and scale that was in the questionnaire? Because I don't recall, and I'll just.
Give me a second.
Yep.
So in the SurveyMonkey, so each one appears here, they're obviously put next to each other
Right.
just for the purposes of formatting. In the survey, they were formatted to be kind of to scale, the way they are there, where like the floors are approximately even so that the larger ones appear a little bit larger.
But they weren't next to each other. So, and the reason why I'm thinking about this is that, the whole triplex, fourplex thing. And when you line them up here, it's obvious that, the scale of the triple decker is bigger than the fourplex from the front. Did that come that way? In the way that people took the survey, was that evident, or is it only evident here in this format?
I think so, because when you look at it, like triplexes weren't ranked as high when they had the visual, and you guys had commented on that early on, right? And when we asked without the images, triplexes kind of shot up as a potentially preferred option. So without the visual of a 3-story high development, they seemed on paper 3 units as a concept made sense, more sense and welcoming than the actual image itself.
Well, and then to what I think is your question, I will say again, a triplex doesn't necessarily in all parts of the country mean a triple decker, right? So it can mean multiple things. And my recollection of the survey is that the images weren't presented all right next to each other like this, so you could tell that they were like the front door wasn't the same size. I think they were like you scrolled down and saw them, so there wasn't the comparison of scale. Like I didn't notice that the first time, but it's apparent here.
Let's see. I have it
Just
open.
will not let me stop share.
I just love sharing. Am I sharing now? Here we go.
Perfect.
This is the PDF of it, and this is approximately what they looked like in the SurveyMonkey. So this is the order that they were in, and this is the size that they were.
Right, yeah.
So we did try to to the extent possible,
Yeah.
given that they are images, scale them so that it was clear, like, this is 3, this is larger, this
Yeah.
is smaller. It was interesting. I mean, we had designed the survey to ask the question twice intentionally because we wanted to make sure that we were getting
It's interesting.
getting real answers and that we believed that the images would change people's opinions, and they did.
And I'll just say it because I find this, very interesting, whether it's this or Reading or somewhere else, of the difference in responses based on age.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that says, that's just huge.
It's like a
to
perfect
me.
little pyramid.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, we were, we felt like that was a really important point to illustrate and to
Yep.
continually bring up that there is such a huge generational divide on this topic. And it's in our own survey data.
Mary, do we have the ability of going back to the people that responded and to ask supplemental questions?
Like what?
Like, do you use what mode of transportation do you use to get to work? Do you work in Reading or do you work outside of Reading? I mean, I can think of some questions that would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, we could. I guess for me, I'd have to consider what the intent of the survey was, is to help draft zoning, right? And so if we're asking about alternate modes of transportation and other items, where do you work, how do you get there? It doesn't neatly fit in zoning. It's good information for us to have and could support components or give us reasoning to find more information for certain components of what maybe is the long-term vision here, but it's not going to necessarily tie back to the zoning that we need to propose now.
I might argue against that because there's a lot of questions here. Do you want these close to public transit? Do you want to be walking distance from amenities and things like that?
That's location of zoning is what we're trying to get at with
Right.
that.
So, and that's where I was kind of going with some of those questions.
Mhm.
And I mean, really, when the legislature in their infinite wisdom chose this, they chose it based on the ability to use the train.
Mhm.
And I'd love to know whether that's true or not.
But, perception, how am I getting at this? Right, whether you perceive you need the train or whether you actually need the train sort of is irrelevant in the community's in the community's acceptance of a particular form, right?
Yeah, no,
I mean, we do it
agree.
all the time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I
So,
agree with that.
yeah.
We do have, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind of remembering some really good data as part of the housing production plan. Because I think we used it when we gave the presentation to the select board about where people go during their day. I think it was like how many people commute into Boston, and how many people commute around. I am really curious about whether or not there's any updated data about how that changed during and post-pandemic and how train use is changing. And I'll throw that out there because it's on my mind that, the intention of MBTA communities is to have higher density housing near transit. Reading is kind of in a unique spot because we have a theoretically amazing commuter rail service that takes us to Boston. We also have 4 or 5 exits to the highway. So we're also, one of my friends calls Reading the most convenient town in the world. We're convenient in many ways. And so as we do this, but we have to have at least 50% of our new units within the community, within a half mile of the train station. But we may be well served to think about the realities about where people can and can't get to using commuter rail and people are going. And so if there's any updated data or current data on that, about where people go during the course of their day and whether that might be helpful. I think.
I'm sure the town has a 5 or 10 year plan of conservation and development. No?
Sorry, no, we have a master plan from 2007, 2008,
2006.
Okay.
2006.
Because a lot of that data would be in that type of thing, and there are some Commonwealth resources that I bet you can get that data from.
Yeah, so I'll look at the EDAP, which mostly relates to like commuting and work travel, and see what data we might have from there in terms of like where people are going on a regional scale for work. Maybe that has something. I can't remember off the top of my
I
head.
think that's what I remember from the housing production plan, and I just don't know if there's like,
It's
if there,
so
if it's
hard
been
because it's-
updated, because
because
everything
it's
is
so
changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, with post-pandemic, you still aren't gonna get.
Right,
really
exactly,
much
yeah,
change.
looking at
like
it.
Still-
real time,
still
yeah.
working out.
Years,
right, I actually think that, you know, what commuting patterns in the end of this calendar year are gonna be different than they were in
year
June,
ago.
even June and July,
That's true.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
September, right, we're in the middle of a big shift in a lot of people's lives, right? And how that all plays out, and whether people decide to go in or take commuter rail or drive. I mean, I think
Well, you
we're
got
in the
that-
heart
It's
of a
kind of a
change.
mystery,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
hybrid, you have, you know, people
Yeah.
working on a couple times a week, so
Hmm.
they drive instead of taking the
Yeah.
train. Yeah, it's really hard right now because everybody's got
Yeah.
to flex on what they're doing.
Like an hour and a half drive into Boston the other morning would say, if I do that again, I'm hopping on the commuter rail,
And what
right?
I
Which
do
wasn't the
remember-
case a few months ago or even, you know, a year ago.
So maybe we just keep that old data, I mean, it's not that old, but keep that data front and center. What I do remember is even being like really surprised at what percentage of people in Reading commuted into Boston. I mean, it's like, you would think so because we've got a great commuter rail, but we have a commuter rail. But it would be good to keep that front and center through
Yeah.
this process.
Agreed.
The other thing that I'd like to know is, where are the areas in town that there's underutilized or abandoned or empty industrial areas, industrial parks and the like, schools that may be abandoned, and the like?
You find them, you let me know.
I haven't done that much yet. Well, I can give you one right now, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But one right now is over by it's Market Basket.
Yeah, so I mean,
behind
that's,
yeah.
yeah, so that's,
There was a sort of an economic development planning
Yep.
charrette one
Yep.
night about that whole area behind Action where Reading Light is and Market Basket and
Mhm.
DPW and how do we redevelop that area?
yeah, so I think we'd like to consider some visioning for that area in the near future. We've done the Eastern Gateway work already through some grant applications, and I know economic development is also interested in it, but it is a tough area. There's a lot of private land. There's a lot of different struggles there, right? And so we can promote a long-term vision and look at the zoning there, but and we'll get there in a second where we might see the MBTA community zoning, but when you talk about rezoning at the industrial zone district, it's a much larger visioning process. If housing is appropriate there, you're talking probably on a larger scale, and commercial requirements and X percentages and affordable, it's just a different vision than what we might see here in the MBTA communities. So I don't want to ignore that aspect, and certainly could be a prime discussion, but I think it's a different discussion at this point in time.
So the MBTA communities it's a half a mile radius around
Correct.
the depot?
And I,
You know, I agree with John's comment that the age demographics does show a lot, you know, in terms of, and I agree with Heather's comment with regard to wanting to know where people commute from. But there are other minor issues. One is how high can our fire trucks reach in terms of height? Because we certainly wouldn't want to construct a 7-story building and have the ladders only go
I
up.
don't think you'll be getting that proposal from me.
And then the one thing that surprised me a little bit is, since I've been through this before, is that you can achieve so much of the legislative requirement by a larger mid-rise than you can by triplexes. and the like. And yet, that was very low in the,
I think that's a discussion point that could,
Yeah, so let's talk about where we're headed with this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the end of our presentation next week ends with the survey results. And then we put out the first ideas, right? That's where we're headed. I'm gonna share these slides with you, hopefully, so you can see
Before we get into
them.
that, may I ask one last question
Yeah,
about
of
the survey
course.
results about the age? How does the breakdown of age of respondents compare to the actual breakdown of residents in Reading? Like, was it skewed in
can
one
look
way
at
or
that
the other?
comparison.
Like,
I mean-
did it mirror the age breakdown in Reading?
I'd have to look.
I'd be interested in that. I mean, I could look it up too, I suppose, but if you have easy access.
do we have a question on renters or owners?
We did have a question on renters or owners. Our survey overstates owners as a percentage of the population, which we anticipated. It's
Not
hard to get
surprised.
renters.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So we're closing up the presentation next week with talking about like how we as staff are transporting these results forward. From our perspective, the survey results are very clear that people want the zoning changes, multifamily to be near transit, near commercial and pedestrian friendly areas. That brings us back into the half mile, right? Like you can debate in the half mile, out of the half mile. We felt like the survey results and the rankings that we got, people said transit oriented, pedestrian friendly. So that brings us in the half mile. That's how we interpret that. Mid-rise buildings also very definitively came in last place, right? That's which of the other ones is in first is an open question, but it felt to us, again, very definitive that if we are choosing from them, that mid-rise was the least desirable choice. If mid-rise is the least desirable choice, that removes, from our perspective, all of the business areas from consideration. Because in order to put residential into those areas, it would have to be larger mid-rise buildings with mixed use, because those are commercial areas and we want to keep them as a commercial base. The priority also, right, like working through that, smaller scale multifamily that aesthetically fits into the neighborhoods. So where that takes us, A40, the existing A40 is a natural fit. It already has multifamily, it fits with the existing zoning. It alone, this A40 that's north of downtown here, doesn't have enough acres to work alone, it's 17. We propose combining A40 with portions of S15 to create a new district, right? The new district would allow units up to a max density. We would be focused on the triples and the quads that would fit with the aesthetic character of the neighborhoods. And we really want to focus on an equal distribution of those zoning changes across the entire half-mile area. One primary reason is to disperse potential future school enrollment to a variety of elementary schools. So we're gonna float that to the people and see what they think. That's where we're headed with it. Obviously, if people do not want to go in that direction, which we will find out, the reverse would be to do the opposite of what the survey suggests and instead to put mid-rise buildings in, because as Tom points out, you can get to the number a lot faster with mid-rise buildings.
Or do a combination of the two.
Yep.
And I do like the idea of the bottom floor being commercial or retail in the mid-rise. So the other thing I found tough is it seemed like one of the state plans in coming up with the legislation was that there's some playscape in the area, because they're talking about young families, and with the density that they're looking for at 15 an acre, you're not gonna get much green. You won't even have enough room for a putting space. But what I'm kind of getting at is, I'm trying to think around the center of Reading, where are the kind of parks that kids could go to and the like.
There are actually a number of parks.
Perfect ad for the
Okay.
CPA.
Oh, yes, yep.
Preservation Act,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
wouldn't it be
yeah.
nice to create some park space?
Yeah, and I think,
That's what's being done in some of the places.
Ever,
Yeah,
also, I will
And-
say.
yeah, I mean, I think open space was one of the driving factors of the 40R amendments last
Yes.
year, right? And a
Mhm.
big concern and question, so, I just think where we see it, where we're at now, is now trying to, from what we've heard from last year in 40R and where the survey is currently, is okay, like if we're not gonna focus downtown, if we don't really want to revisit that zoning, then we kind of have to gradually abut that, right? And so you have maybe your mid-rise and then you're gradually in gentle, right, that gentle density. Missing middle terminology might be appropriate in this case for Reading to help supplement the downtown without overwhelming a small portion of the land area here, which downtown is just 45 acres or so. And why you saw when all 6 projects went up at once, everybody was like, whoa, this is fast.
Because most of that area also, the area that we're talking about, all of it predates zoning in Reading, so there's already multifamily, there's already triples and quads mixed in with single family homes, which is also why we feel like the gentle density already exists, we would just be legalizing it.
And I think to what Mary had mentioned, that we'd really look to put parameters if this concept were to move forward, that we're not overly densifying, I guess for lack of a better term, the neighborhoods and areas, and that we're looking to put parameters of whether that's a max lot size, max density, max units counts up to 4, up to 6. So there's give and take, right? You know, less units maybe means smaller lots have to open up, and setbacks are less. If you say maybe up to 6, maybe you can do a medium lot size minimum requirement, right? Rather than 5, aim for 6,500, 7,500, something like that. So it all kind of comes back to the tool and how that mathematically works and how we plug it in based on, because right now we're focused on form and location, right? Which is the important aspect, but everything like setbacks, height, parking is going to factor into the tool on top of that. So it's not as simple as saying, right, on a 6,500 square foot lot, 3 units is 20 units per acre, but once you factor everything else in, how does it really spit out in the tool? So those are what we'll be working on in the background, and we've been looking at both the downtown and these abutting areas on the existing parcel dimensionals. So we're looking at what the average lot size of an existing 3 to 4 unit structure is in and around this area compared to a single family, compared to a 2-family lot. So all of them are actually kind of fairly similar. It's once you start hitting those 13 plus unit buildings that your lot sizes, your frontages, your density dramatically increases on a lot. But compared to the 3 and 4, from what we're finding, and we're kind of finishing some of that up now, it's substantially similar to a single family lot. So in effect, if we can take our single family zoning parameters and use them for 3 or 4, then hopefully that helps alleviate any concerns on them, because nobody is doing more than what's currently allowed except unit based. And so that's the hope. So we're working right now to kind of establish what those floors are and then take it from there. And of course, there's going to be a lot of public comment on the zoning language itself, but what we know is minimum lot sizes have to come down so that we can get compliance in the tool based on Reading's existing tiny average lots.
Right now, 90% of our lots are non-conforming lots.
That
And we need the
mile.
reverse,
Yeah.
right? We need 90% to be in conformance.
So
And so that's what's happening on our end, is like, how do we match that up? How do we convert all of these to work within the tool?
So that they can be built, right?
Exactly.
I do have a question about it,
Mhm.
about the proposal, and it's aligned with this survey. I'm looking at and seeing actually a fairly decent response to people who thought 3, 4 units and 5+ units should be built along and within commercial corridors. So is the approach that you're taking, do you feel like that fits with that response as well?
I don't see how a 3 or 4 unit or even 5 unit fits along a commercial corridor. You can, we've seen it, right? Woburn Street is one example, 18 Woburn, 6 units, 2,500 square feet of commercial. That was a 1.5 year long public hearing process, tough development. So it's not really, I guess, the intent of this law, or maybe what we would see as appropriate for a 3 or 4 smaller unit development. I would personally love to consider one day some sort of like accessory commercial unit for, you know, whether that's single family or other smaller missing middle units that have small commercial accessories to them, but I don't see how they really fit along your primary commercial corridor unless you really want to do a transformative vision along the corridor and make it even more pedestrian friendly, make it even more connections, better connections to the train and other areas. But I don't see Main Street maybe taking that dramatic of a change.
I would
in the
say,
near term.
yeah, one of the challenges, right, is that Reading has a very limited number of commercial corridors. So that's a challenge. There's not, maybe in other places, right, you have different maybe levels of like neighborhood commercial, more intense commercial. And I think Reading maybe doesn't have as many options in terms of being able to locate smaller scale multifamily along the commercial corridors because there just aren't as many.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from my perspective, I interpreted that as well, you know, we put it near, you know, so that you can still have access to the things that are on the commercial corridor, even if you're not directly on it, right? I think the idea that you're not gonna put it way out in a neighborhood that's not near any of the major roads, right? I feel like that is a kind of the way we interpreted it.
Yeah, and it's beneficial, you know, for the pedestrian to be slightly off, like, you know, 2 or 3 blocks behind.
Right,
the
behind the
commercial,
commercial,
right.
exactly.
As opposed to on Main
Mhm.
Street, it's, you know, you're behind it,
Right.
but still access to it.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of the legalizing, like, all of the multifamily that we have in, you know, down Woburn Street and down in that zone, down by the train that already is there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear that, although I point to like Assembly Square up in Somerville.
Mhm.
There's a mixed area, access to the train and things like that. How big an area, are we taking an area to say, okay, if we rezone this entire area, we will have the 1,500 we need? Or are we thinking of doing a drop-down zone? Saying these areas you can drop down, by that means you can drop down a higher density in a zone? Or are you gonna turn the entire zone into, as of right, you have the right to build a triplex or a quad or a what?
That one, the second
I
option.
think the latter, yeah, and
Okay,
so I mean, as we move forward, we have to better understand, is this an underlying zoning district and the by right underlying zone, or is it an overlay on top? I think,
that's probably
right,
the word
like,
I should have used.
yeah, so I think underlying could make sense here. We just have to kind of figure out the appropriate sections of the bylaw, because that spans now multiple sections rather than an overlay that can be dropped, but it gives the signifying that this is right an underlying by right use, and
Is there like a visual of that map that you were showing with the boundary? Like, how much more do we need? Is it like
Yeah.
a quarter? Is it like on a pie chart? Like how
what do you
much?
mean, how much more?
How much more of the zoning do we need of the is it the A40 that we're starting to look at? Like how much more of the teal do we need to comply?
So we need a minimum of 43 acres.
But what does that mean?
So
It also depends, right, on like what density we go with and the lot sizes, so it's an equation, right?
Right.
And as you adjust the various pieces, lots fall in and out of compliance. We wouldn't anticipate if we go with a lower density of like saying 3 or 4 units on a lot, we will need more than 43 acres in order to achieve that 15 units. I can tell you that in this entire area, there's like, what is it, like 400 something acres? So there's more than enough to choose from.
So at the meeting on Monday, I just have 2 questions. I'm wondering if, first, if it's gonna be recorded. I have a work
Mhm.
meeting at the same time, so can't participate. Are you going to be talking about where? I mean, that half mile radius is really big, and there are some areas that are in fact actually really close to the train, kind of nestled in there between the Smart Growth District, Business A. Are you gonna be getting input about where, or not get down to those little details?
That's for our second event. So the goal with the first is like just education. I think one of the biggest challenges we found is that people just do not know what zoning is. They do not know what the current zoning is. And particularly on this topic, in order to understand how we have to change it, people need to have at least a little bit of understanding of what the current zoning is, right? About like why you can't develop by right in any of these districts, which requires explaining what by right is. So that's all that like backup information is what's going into this one, which is also why we're filming it. I'm gonna be posting the video because it's like our big background primer. And then the second event is where we anticipate actually working with people and opening the discussion of here's what we're proposing, where do we think, what do we think, talking about lot sizes, talking about setbacks, kind of walking people through all the trade-offs that will exist in that equation that gets us to the density and acreage that we need. And that event is on October 11th, and we're working on our ideas.
Yeah, some sort of, like, if we go with all low, is it all blue? Is it like half blue? Like, I think that would be very informative for people.
I think we want to guide people, our intention is to guide people through the discussion of kind of the aspects before we draw anything on a map. Because the choices about the aspects will ultimately determine a lot of the amount of area that we need.
And as soon as you put it on a map, it
1000%.
goes
People
right
react.
down to,
Absolutely.
that's my
That's-
parcel and you're
Yeah.
gonna plant something
We have,
next to me and it's gonna build tomorrow, and there's
Mhm.
gonna be
We
something
are not
right,
releasing
right,
any
so-
maps until November. We have already decided that, and we will obviously show them to all of you before they become public. We don't wanna surprise anyone on this commission with this information, which I like, I wanna make sure you guys like know our takeaways for the next
Mhm.
meeting up front. That way, if people start contacting you, that you're like, yo, yes, I know what my staff was saying. But yeah, we're not gonna lead with the maps or the zones, we're trying to lead with the discussion about the aspects.
Okay.
And that will lead us to make recommendations.
I might suggest that at least you keep on the table certain things. For example, it may be easier to have a zone change into triplexes where you allow a two-family house and a garage to make up the third unit in there, and you zone a larger area to fit that thing. But I think in some of the places, you're gonna wanna have an overlay zone because you may wanna call developers to say, this is an area we're targeting for, obviously, I think it's the larger units and stuff like that. But I just say, keep it on your plate, because I have no idea where I would come out on a lot of
Yeah,
this.
I mean, there's certain parameters that we do have to work in, right? And like ADUs do keep coming up in conversion to ADUs and how that fits itself in with MBTA communities. And the answer is that it doesn't really, because ADUs are limited in size, can be limited in bedrooms, can be limited in occupants, which goes against the MBTA communities law of not restricting family housing. And so we've heard a lot of support for ADU, but we can't actually put those limiting parameters on the zoning that complies with the law. So while they're a great source and they've gotten many benefit, it
Right,
just
it's
doesn't
the difference
fit.
between playing the game,
Right.
Right,
playing
exactly.
the game of
Mhm.
that we're playing with
Right.
with HUD versus
Mhm.
actually trying to get
works, right.
some legitimate housing. I guess though I would go back, right, to, if I remember correctly, right, the way that we define structures, right, there's a definition, and I think I have this right, that if you have another building,
Mhm.
right, it's sort of an ADU,
Mhm.
right, that is within a certain distance from the principal structure,
yeah.
then it's considered part of
Principal,
the
yes.
part of the principal building. And so therefore, like you could have, I guess that's the question.
Right.
Can you define ADUs in a way so that it doesn't get restricted
Mhm.
in the game that we play,
Mhm.
right? But it is something that someone could actually use
Mhm.
in that it's a different structure because but
Yeah,
it's
I'd
still
love to keep
within
that option on the table for
Yeah.
us, so.
Yeah, I mean, either way, one of the strongest pieces of feedback for ADUs is just people are like, legalize all of them by right. And that's like one of the biggest pieces of feedback we've gotten so far, which is interesting. So even
Yeah.
if we can't figure out a way to fit them into this process, he and I were like, yeah, if this is an outcome, then like next year we just take
Do
ADUs and
ADUs,
make them
yeah.
all by right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like we can, he and I were saying like there's lots of feedback we're getting as part of this really housing focused process that unfortunately just isn't necessarily applicable to the process. But like knowing that people are really, there actually are people who are very interested in affordable housing, deed restricted affordable housing, like that's a good outcome of the process that we can take forward into other things, so.
There was a town in Connecticut that had a lot of violations along the line. And the town turned around and basically said, we'll make you legal, provided your other apartment that you let out was affordable housing too. And you had to comply, you had to have the right fire stuff in it and stuff like that. But they legalized them at a cost, so to speak.
Mhm.
It helped the town. I don't think the town has had its numbers yet, but it helped the town get closer to its numbers.
Yeah, the affordable housing piece is interesting. There are lots of people who are very passionate about it, but it's also something where the inclusionary zoning only works in larger mid-rise buildings. So it's, again, it's like, well, if we don't want mid-rise buildings, then it's not gonna be a part of our MBTA community's zoning changes. It doesn't mean we can't do something else in the future about it. It just, there are pieces that will fit in one direction that don't fit in another. So that's what we're gonna try to
Well,
explain to the
I've
public.
seen subdivisions that, they're lower cost subdivisions, they're not basement subdivisions. But what developers do is they don't complete the second floor, they don't build it out. So they can sell the unit for a much cheaper price. And they can make enough money on it. These are usually condos of some kind. But, you know, it can be done. You know, and you can make the entire complex look like nobody's got a house that's cheaper than anybody else. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of creative options out there, right? Like Salem is now implemented right of first refusal on rental properties so that the city of Salem could potentially look to procure those rental developments and keep them rental and affordable. So there's all sorts of creative options out there. I think it comes back to the HPP strategies that we've seen of looking to better utilize our affordable housing trust fund, maybe pursuing something like CPA to help support funding for these programs and affordable housing and other elements that maybe do promote that smaller scale affordable, deed restricted affordable housing. So how it plays into MBTA communities, we will see at this point in time, but I think to Mary's point, like inclusionary zoning, if the concept of this missing middle goes forward, it just might not be a part of this zoning yet, maybe in the future, but.
Last call for questions. Anything else?
Just keep us all safe if we show up at the meeting.
I'm gonna make
Ditto.
you wave, admit that you're a CPDC member, and that's all you have to do.
Isn't there a limit to the number of CPD members who can show up at the meeting?
We'll be posting your agenda just in case. Not that you have to speak or act as a CPDC member, but in the light that all of you wish to attend, you will have free reign to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Do you wanna approve the minutes? That was the only other thing.
Sure.
I got comments from John. Did anyone else have any comments on the minutes?
I didn't have any comments.
Does anyone feel the need to review?
No, I'm going to abstain since I wasn't there.
All right. Tony, did you review and have no comments, or did you not get a chance to review?
I reviewed and have no comment.
All right.
I have just the comment that your logo is messed up on mine.
Oh, I think that's from the way that you're opening. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, is
not
that your
that.
Google Doc
Yeah,
version?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not like that
Yeah.
on yours.
Yeah.
It's like that on
Formatting
mine
one.
too.
The formatting
Well,
is
yeah,
old Word
it's
document.
weird.
So I'm not surprised that
Yeah.
you have difficulties when you drag it into Google Docs.
That's my only comment.
All right,
Do we
anyone wanna,
make a motion
Make a
to
motion.
approve the meeting minutes from August 14th, 2023? Anything else I have to say?
Second?
all right, Tony,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
John, yes,
Heather abstained.
Mark abstains.
all right,
3 is enough.
3 is enough. All right, any additional planning updates?
Nothing that you guys aren't aware of. Maybe I should give a plug. I think I did last time, but the Walker's Brook Drive survey is open right now. We're undergoing grant work to consider redesigns of the Walker's Brook corridor. So there's a survey out right now to better understand. I mean, I think we know its deficiencies, but to better understand localized concerns and needs and help bring a potential design forward. So if you're interested in that, check out the webpage under economic development and take the survey if you haven't. And that's probably it. Everything else you're aware of.
All right,
I had a couple questions.
Sure.
One was, we talked about subdivision regs. Is there any plan to update those, or is that gonna be depending
So-
on the zoning changes? or-
well, you know, I was thinking about that, not that particular item, but, you know, seeing such a small agenda, which I haven't, you know, seen in quite a while, and you know, typically come July, right, ish, we do start to think about sort of what's on the agenda for CBDC. And I completely understand why we didn't do that with sort of some right changes, and then also with you know, MBTA communities taking up a lot of time, so you know, I'd say typically, I think in most years, we would have some other zoning changes. My guess is that we're right, the zoning change this year is really, our capacity is gonna be filled up by MBTA communities. And I'm gonna say, luckily, we have great staff that is doing a lot of that work. We've always had great staff, luckily, in Reading, but we've been in positions where we've done sort of more work, and I'm sure we will get there with this. It's just not there now. So I don't necessarily wanna, right, I don't think that we, the collective we, can take more on. And probably just need to
I would agree, the
add to
timing-
the list for next year.
Yeah, the timing is not
Yeah.
ASAP, but it is on the list.
We did the process in air, we went through all the subdivision regs, and it was mostly a lot of engineering and public works.
Yeah,
Doing a lot of the heavy lifting
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah,
But it did take a while.
yeah.
yeah, it would take a while, and there are potential grants out there for it. We would love to do like LID and stormwater within the subdivision regs. It just hasn't like gotten its place at the top just yet.
We
So-
do have kind of like a list that we would refer to, a list of like things we
Things we
wanted
wanna
to
do,
Mhm.
yeah.
before MBTA
Yeah.
communities come along, and
Yeah.
I'm reminding myself that we also have an instructional motion to make a recommendation about a master plan as well.
Yes, that one has kind of
That's
creeped
another-
back
I'm just
into
thinking
my
about
mind
the
where I'm like,
things
oh
on
yeah,
that
where has
list.
that kind of fallen?
And is that for Springtown meeting? I assume that's-
Wasn't the recommendation on funding?
The
Yeah, funding
recommendation, yeah, that we're supposed to recommend basically a budget for what it would take to do a master plan. So I suppose that should come like later this year to feed into the financial planning, right? Anyhow,
Yeah.
that's why,
So-
that's just a reason we haven't yet gotten to
Yeah,
subdivision
yeah,
regulations.
And maybe if
So-
you had, like you said, a little kind of a to-do list.
We do, I'm gonna say, we do have a
is
list,
a
right? There
list,
is a
yeah.
There
list
is a list,
somewhere,
yeah.
right, that we were keeping and going through some, and as I said, I think it was usually in July
Yeah.
that we would sort of go through, like, which do we think that we can tackle, and, you know, that sort of thing. Right, I do know why we've never gotten to subdivision is because of all the items, we see so few subdivisions, and in pretty much every subdivision that we have seen in the past, you know, 10 years has been, or even 20 years, has been 2 or 3 unit subdivision on the end of a cul-de-sac, right? And like, you know, like, we get what you get, and do we really, there's never been all that much of a need or feel like a need to go delve into those changes, because we know what we're getting. You know, there's not that much land left to get anything else. So there's been other pressing items like that whole sign. We redid the sign bylaw because of the
HE law.
yeah, Supreme Court.
We went through a whole thing with the use table and never got to finish because of the pandemic started.
Yeah.
And so there was like a lot.
Updated 40R.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's been some other things that.
The one area that might dovetail though might be parking. Cause you gotta do parking with the MTBA.
Maybe not.
Yeah, there was a parking, I don't know what parking advisory, it's
Recommendation
PARC,
committee, yep.
whatever that, yeah, on looking at parking in downtown. And it was a lengthy set of meetings. I'm trying to figure out how to say that. A lengthy set of meetings that came up with some recommendations. That was not just this. It was some community members. It was a bigger group. So purposefully, you know, it's not just a CPDC regulation issue. So
To your
that was
point-
just last year. Year and a half ago or so.
And to your point on like a parking by like whatever is going to be proposed for MBTA communities, like the discussion is specific to that use, those exact sections, like we would not be allowed under town meeting to like edit or amend other sections of say section 9 parking. It's gonna be very specific to what we proposed, and so it's, you know, not a giant but I guess
And
section
that
specific.
zoning needs to be done by next fall.
Correct, calendar year 2024, we must comply.
So we're aiming for spring town meeting
Yes,
because there is also fall town
Yeah.
meeting.
that's the hope and plan. Got more
Alright.
questions?
So the only other, well, there's a couple
Yeah.
other things, and we don't need to talk about those, but this, I don't know where this came up. But for a lot of these little subdivisions, we're requiring HOAs for stormwater maintenance, and I don't know how the town manages those. That was a big struggle that I had in air, was that we have these HOAs and I had no control over them.
Right.
So they're supposed to be maintaining their stormwater, and, you know, I'd try to get them to submit stormwater maintenance reports and things like that. And I'd get people that lived in the HOAs that would say, I'm paying this money every month and I don't know what they're doing with it. And I don't know who has it, how much they have. And I don't know if that's something that, that the towns looked at, and that's something that we ought to be considering as part of our approvals when there's an HOA.
Yeah, the town engineer and I have talked about it in the past of what is the best practice, and regardless of which way you do it, whether it's like the private entities maintaining it, it's hard to get their reports. If you say the town will maintain it, we don't really have the staffing capacity to do it every year at the town-wide level. And so I think it's one that warrants more discussion and finding out other best practices. But to date, we've been deferring to the HOAs. If that answers your question.
Sort of, it's, you know, it's
Done,
kind
yeah.
of, for all communities, it's sort of one
It
of
is,
those
yeah.
things that has evolved but hasn't really got
And
a
with
lot of teeth
stormwater
behind it.
capture becoming more and more prevalent, it's just more of a hot topic of how it's maintained.
What I had proposed in air was that the HOAs would pay the town to maintain,
Mhm.
whether the town did it or we hired a contractor.
Mhm.
We'd collect the money from them and then we'd get done.
You proposed it, did it pass?
We never put it in, got it in place. One of the problems was that after I went through about 2 years of implementing a stormwater utility, the selectmen voted against it. So we didn't end up with a stormwater utility.
You might wanna check with council.
Yeah.
Somewhat related are the sewers, of the associations and the like. And there might be a provision in the Commonwealth with regard to HOAs have to maintain, the end of life expectancy and building up a reserve to replenish it or fix it or
I don't
maintain
think
it.
the Commonwealth has any laws on that.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I was too,
no.
but I looked into it a lot. I couldn't
But
find.
that is a major problem. And one of the things I wrote down here is, Tony, this is more directed to you. I said, if the town is plowing streets that are private streets, it should have no liability in the event that asphalt is picked up, because the private streets are not well maintained.
So the town, my understanding, and I'm not in charge of anything, so take it with a grain of salt. The town maintains the private ways to a limited extent, i.e. they'll fill a pothole and so forth, because of emergency access vehicles. So if the town is plowing a private way and they rip up some asphalt, nobody goes back to the town and says, hey, you broke this, you go fix it. They simply report the pothole and it gets fixed along with every other pothole.
Yeah.
So there's no mechanism in town keeping track of the private ways, what damage is done to them, who's maintaining them, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing the town will not do is they will not repave a private way in its entirety or put up sidewalks without charging the abutters.
No, I agree with you. All I was trying to say is I agree with Mark. What is gonna happen is, the stormwater runoff is gonna be defective at some point in time, and everybody's gonna look to the town to pay for it, pay for the fix.
Well, that's when you sue the HOA and find them, and you'll find out where that money went off the bat.
Well, you'll find out they never collected it to begin with.
Or they collected and went to Florida for vacation.
Yeah.
Noted.
And then the other thing I wanted, just to be thinking about was, we talked about these waivers where, we're not requiring them to do certain things. And, like John said, we don't have a lot of big subdivisions, so it's not like they're putting in miles of curving or miles of sidewalk. But if there's some mechanism that we could say, well, if you're gonna get a waiver for a sidewalk, that's worth $10,000, that would go into the sidewalk funding bank or something like that.
Yeah, so
I don't think that you can do that. in
Yeah, so-
Massachusetts.
I don't think legally you can't, but you might be able to say, well, we could probably grant that waiver if you.
so
Yeah, I think that
We did that with Conservation Commission where we had them do offsite mitigation,
right.
so.
it's gotta be, there's gotta be some nexus
Yeah.
to the offsite,
the impact.
to the
Right,
impact.
so it would have to be in lieu in the payments, and I don't know if that's possible for sidewalks. I know development impact fees aren't like a thing in Massachusetts. They're starting to maybe come around nowadays and people are finding ways to do them, but from what I know, it's in lieu of, and then any funding has to be back to the exact similar use which can be pretty restrictive and tied. So I've never seen it for sidewalks. Happy to look into it, but it's just nothing.
No, I just was thinking with any of these waivers.
Yeah,
and
with any of them,
lights
yeah.
and Stuff, trees.
See what we can.
The other option is you make them put in sidewalks, on the assumption that in the next 100 years, there's gonna be sidewalks everywhere.
It's true.
All right, anything else? Another motion?
Move to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. I hear
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.